In the age of open-weight generative AI, hyperrealistic media is proliferating at an unprecedented rate, and with it, a crisis of digital trust. Automated disinformation, synthetic evidence in legal proceedings, non-consensual deepfakes, these are no longer hypotheticals. They are systemic threats. To combat this, invisible watermarks have emerged as a cornerstone of digital provenance, cryptographic signals embedded into synthetic media to verify origin. But here's the critical question. Can they survive the very tools designed to manipulate them? Current state-of-the-art invisible watermarks fall into two dominant mathematical paradigms, spatial and latent. Spatial watermarks operate in the pixel domain. They embed high-frequency binary payloads directly into the visible image after generation, using deep learning models like RivaGAN. These models route payloads into high-variance textures, relying on redundancy across the pixel grid to survive classical distortions like cropping or brightness adjustments. On the other hand, latent watermarks, exemplified by tree ring, operate before generation. They bake continuous cryptographic signatures into the initial Fourier frequencies of the diffusion model's noise vector, the foundational blueprint of the image. Because the watermark is encoded at the generative core, it theoretically resists localized pixel-level editing. This dual approach has become the de facto standard in both research and industry, with closed-source systems like Google's SynthID and the C2PA metadata framework building upon these principles. But here's the gap. Most evaluations of these systems rely on outdated, isolated attacks, standard cropping, brightness shifts, Gaussian blur. These are classical signal processing distortions. They don't reflect how real-world adversaries actually operate. Today's threat actors use generative editing tools that don't just alter pixels, but restructure the underlying mathematical fabric of an image. Image-to-image translation, semantic inpainting, and geometric cropping are not passive edits. They are algorithmic overwrites. They rewrite the image's content using the same generative models that created it. And in doing so, they exploit the very assumptions behind current watermarking strategies. To test this, we conducted a rigorous, automated benchmark across thousands of image permutations. We used stable diffusion v15, the foundational architecture behind the vast majority of open-source adversarial laundering pipelines, to generate 4,000 images, 2,000 with tree ring latent watermarks, 2,000 post-generated with RivaGAN spatial watermarks. Then we subjected them to a full suite of attacks across intensity intervals, using an automated pipeline powered by Hugging Faces, diffusers, torch vision, and DDIM schedulers. Our attacks were carefully calibrated. Image-to-image, im-to-im, rewriting global pixel structure via diffusion resampling, with noise strength scaled from 0.01 to 0.95. Semantic inpainting, masking and replacing localized regions using deterministic geometric bounding boxes, 60% area removal. Geometric cropping, static center crop operations that destroy spatial alignment. Brightness adjustments, intensity scaling up to 3x. But we didn't just measure evasion. We defined a new framework, the adversarial evasion region AER. The state where a watermark is successfully scrubbed, provenance score drops below a critical evasion threshold of 0.2, while preserving high visual utility, OpenClip VI TB32, cosine similarity greater or equal to 75. The results revealed something profound. Spatial and latent watermarks don't just fail differently, they fail orthogonally. RivaGAN, the spatial model, showed remarkable resilience to non-destructive physical changes. Under basic cropping, evasion was only 22.67%. Brightness adjustments, 22%. But under im-to-im translation, it collapsed 67.47% evasion. Similarly, semantic inpainting yielded 66.8%. Why? Because RivaGAN's watermark is embedded as high-frequency noise across the pixel grid. When a generative model performs a full image rewrite, as in im-to-im, it treats the watermark as noise to be denoised. The model doesn't distinguish between the watermark and the image's own texture. It overwrites the payload, preserving semantics while destroying provenance. Conversely, tree ring, the latent watermark, was nearly invulnerable to generative attacks. Im-to-im evasion, 17.73%. Inpainting, 10.27%. Why? Because the watermark is baked into the Fourier frequency domain, the global blueprint. Pixel-level rewriting cannot dislodge it without collapsing the entire image structure. But tree ring had a fatal flaw, geometric misalignment. Under static center cropping, its evasion rate spiked to 43.2%, nearly double that of RivaGAN. Why? Because tree ring extraction relies on fast Fourier transforms, FFTs, which depend on strict global grid alignment. When you crop the image, you shift the spatial grid. The frequency rings, which were perfectly synchronized during generation, become desynchronized during extraction. The watermark signal is lost in phase noise. The system fails not because of content manipulation, but because of geometry. This is the key insight. These vulnerabilities are mathematically orthogonal. Spatial watermarks are fragile to algorithmic overwriting, but robust to geometric shifts. Latent watermarks are fragile to geometric misalignment, but robust to algorithmic rewriting. This is not a matter of better engineering. It's a fundamental structural limitation. Single-domain watermarking is inherently insufficient. You cannot defend against both generative overwriting and geometric laundering with a single paradigm. And here's what this means for the future. The era of single-layer provenance is over. We must move toward dual-layer, multi-domain watermarking, systems that intelligently combine spatial and latent signatures. Not just by stacking them, but by routing them into non-interfering null spaces, embedding pixel-level payloads into regions of the image where they don't disrupt the latent frequency signature, and embedding latent signatures where they don't corrupt the spatial texture. But this introduces a new challenge: signal interference. Naive combination leads to internal collision, where one watermark corrupts the other. Future research must develop adaptive routing algorithms that dynamically allocate payloads based on image content, structure, and attack context. Moreover, we must shift from evaluating watermarks against single-vector attacks to complex, combinatorial threat models. Real adversaries don't just crop or inpaint, they chain attacks. First inpaint a face, then use im to re-render the scene, then crop the result. These compound attacks could render even dual-layer systems vulnerable. Our study formalizes a critical truth. The failure modes of today's watermarking systems are not bugs, they are features of their underlying mathematical manifolds. And until we design defenses that span both spatial and latent domains, that account for both algorithmic rewriting and geometric desynchronization, digital provenance will remain a fragile illusion. The future of trust in synthetic media isn't in better models. It's in synergistic architectures, systems that understand their own blind spots and compensate for them with intelligent, layered design. Because in the battle for digital truth, the only defense is a defense that knows its limits and builds beyond them.